In this video, we're going to discuss manufacturing overhead. So you would hear the phrase manufacturing overhead when you're talking about a company that actually manufactures a physical product. So a university or a law firm, accounting firm, something that provides a service instead of building a product cannot have manufacturing overhead, okay? It's only a manufacturing company. They build a physical product. They can have this manufacturing overhead. So the question is then, what is manufacturing overhead? So it's any manufacturing cost whatsoever other than direct materials and direct labor. Okay, so if you remember, we've got direct materials are basically the raw materials that go into physically building the product, and they're directly traceable to the product. And then we had direct labor is the cost of compensation for the employees who are physically working on the product, and their labor can be traced to the product. So we have manufacturing costs is everything else, right? That's what this is. It's just this big blob of costs of all these different things that are manufacturing overhead costs. So if we did a quick overview of the manufacturing costs for a manufacturer, we've got the direct materials, we've got the direct labor, and then we've got manufacturing overhead. So I know it's not fun when someone defines something by saying what it's not, right? Because really all I've told you here is that it's not direct materials, it's not direct labor, and yet it's a manufacturing cost. So what are some examples of manufacturing overhead? Well, indirect materials. So if we're thinking about, let's say you got a company that builds cars, right? So you're producing cars like General Motors or Toyota or something, and they're building cars, and let's say they use some grease. When they're making the car, they use some grease. Well, if we think about something like steel, that's clearly a direct material. We can trace the steel to the car that the steel was used to make. But grease, it's a little bit more difficult to trace. And so that's an indirect material, so it gets lumped into this category of manufacturing overhead simply because it's a material that's not traceable. Okay, similarly, labor that is not traceable. For example, we talk about a janitor who's sweeping the floor, a security guard for the factory, somebody who's doing something like that. They're not actually physically touching the product, yet they work with the factory. So that person's compensation, that would be said, well, it's not traceable to the product, so we're going to include that in manufacturing overhead. So we've got those are the first two buckets, and then we have another bucket of manufacturing overhead, which we can call it other or something like that, right? So we've got the indirect materials, indirect labor, and then we've got some other costs. So I'm just this is not a comprehensive list, but just to give you some of the main ones: depreciation on the factory building itself, on any equipment in the factory, any kind of depreciation related to the factory. Now, don't get fooled. This isn't just any kind of depreciation. If I was making a test, for example, and I asked you about depreciation on a printer at a sales office, well, that's not part of the factory. That's not a manufacturing cost. So it's not just all depreciation going into manufacturing overhead. It's depreciation that's related to the factory, okay, or in something in the factory like equipment and so forth. Now, any real estate taxes on the factory, and again, if there were real estate taxes on a sales office, we say forget it, because we're only talking about manufacturing costs that are related to the factory. So real estate taxes for the factory, electricity for the factory, the cost of water for the factory, insurance for the factory. All of these things, if you think about it, none of these things are directly traceable to the product. That's if you want to know what is the common denominator behind this group of costs, is that we've got all these costs that clearly are manufacturing costs, right? Depreciation on a factory, electricity for the factory, they're clearly manufacturing costs. Yet, do we know how much electricity was used to build one specific car? We can't really trace it to the product. And so what we're going to end up needing to do with manufacturing overhead is we're going to have to find a way to allocate it. We're going to have to find a way to spread it across the products, and we'll talk about that more in the videos to come.